Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for watching. My name is Lloyd Diernisse. I am a cybersecurity consultant, and I specialize in the areas of strategic risk analysis and risk management. Today, I'd like to take a few minutes and talk to you about the definition of two terms which are closely related but have vastly different impact on your organization depending on how they're interpreted. Those terms are inherent risk and residual risk. Put very simply, inherent risk is the risk that comes right out of the box with something. You buy a new computer, there are some risks associated with the ownership and use of that computer. If you have a software program that you're using, or if you are connected to the internet, you're driving your car, you are shopping, you're just simply going about your daily business, there are risks that are inherent in every one of those activities. And to some extent, some of those risks are things you cannot do anything about. However, if you understand what a risk is, if you understand the fact that a risk simply represents uncertainty, it represents the potential that something could happen. It could be measured in percentages. It could be measured in terms of its likelihood. Then you now have a powerful tool in your pocket to deal with it, because now you can start to collect some information about that risk, and you can try to determine the likelihood of that risk impacting you. You can try to determine, okay, what will actually happen? What will take place to turn that risk into an issue that I actually have to deal with? Or if it's a positive risk, and yes, there is such a thing as positive risks, which I talk about in another episode. If it's a positive risk, what can I do to capitalize on that opportunity? Because that's what we call a positive risk that has manifested. We call it an opportunity. So you take those things together and you say, now I can't do anything about the risk because it's just this benign thing that's out there that may or may not happen. But I can keep track of it. I can identify how that risk may or may not affect me, negatively or positively. And I can also take a look at the circumstances, the events that may occur that could cause that risk to manifest into either an issue, if it's negative, or an opportunity, if it's positive. So once I have that understanding, now I have some actions that I can take. We can attempt to mitigate the manifestations of risks, or we can attempt to capitalize on the manifestations of risk that are positive, that are opportunities. In either event, we have something tangible that we can do. But it only takes us so far. Let's say that we have the risk of our new computer being damaged by an electrical surge. Well, we can put a surge protector on the outlet. So we have not only mitigated the chance of that surge getting through and actually damaging our computer, but if we have done so correctly, we might have remediated that before it turned into an issue. We might have taken that risk away by that action. Now, that's not always the case, and it can be a little dangerous sometimes to assume that whatever steps you've taken are foolproof. Who was it that said that, we keep trying to make things foolproof, but the nature of the universe keeps creating greater fools, better fools, more fools, whatever. And that's very true in our industry in particular. If there's a risk, there's a manifestation out there somewhere. There's a circumstance that could cause it to manifest. In any event, we do everything we can do to manage those risks to the extent that we understand them. When all is said and done, there's risk that's left over, hence the term residual risk. Now, that doesn't mean that we just throw up our hands and say, that's residual risk, there's nothing we can do about it, because if we could have, we would have done it as part of our risk mitigation exercises when we had discovered it as the inherent risk, or as part of the inherent risks, I should say. Not true. Sometimes after you've done everything you can to deal with the inherent risks, you'll find that even though you have a residual risk that's left over, you can actually reduce the likelihood of that risk manifesting by some of the steps that you took. And if you examine that more closely, you might find that you can actually adjust how you mitigated the inherent risk in such a way that you now also are taking that residual risk off the list of risks because you've closed it out. The surge protector is a great example. Suppose now you have other things that are plugged into the surge protector. As long as you don't overload it, as long as you don't put things on it that are beyond its capacity to safely handle, you might find that other devices can be similarly protected. So the risks that were there for those devices can go away through the use of the tool that you put in place. However, like I said, that doesn't eliminate all the risks for all things. There's no panacea here that will magically make them go away. So you can take other steps. For example, you can perhaps, unless you need the computer to run all the time, you can power it down when you're not using it. You can physically disconnect it. All of these steps that you take are moving toward that goal of reducing the residual risk. Now, there's another aspect to this that people very rarely talk about or think about, and I'm not sure if that's because they're uncomfortable with it or because they think that it will kind of open up a Pandora's box of potential problems. And that is the idea of avoiding the risk altogether. So I'll give you an example of something that I saw several years ago. I was a program manager under a contract at a federal agency. I had numerous project managers that worked for me, and we kept getting this feed of projects into the pipeline from one particular part of this government agency that shall remain nameless. And they were unreasonable. They were unreasonable in terms of the amount of work that needed to be done, the deadlines that they were expecting it to be done by, the budgets that they were proposing for it, on and on. By every dimension, every measure, they were unreasonable. However, they're the customer and we're the contractor. So it's our job to figure out a way to handle this customer, to manage them, to manage their expectations, and keep them happy. Because the bottom line is, if they're not happy with you, they're going to get rid of you. It's like any other customer. They're going to bring somebody else in. And that means potentially loss of jobs and on and on. So what can you do, though? Okay, they're the customer. The old saying, the customer's always right. Well, customer isn't always right. Customer is wrong sometimes, but they're still your customer, so you still have to figure out a way of dealing with them. What are you going to do in a situation like that? What you need to do is you need to point out to them a more attractive alternative by which they can avoid some of those risks of the project running over schedule, over budget, or both. In many cases, with this particular group and the nature of these particular projects, a lot of these things were wrapped around the concept of getting some sort of custom programs built, software development. So instead of using that rigid methodology, what's known as a waterfall methodology, to develop these things, which was bound to disappoint, because in the waterfall method, you establish all the requirements up front, and then you lock them in, and then you move forward with the design and the development. Well, what happens if somebody comes along later and has changed the requirements? You very often have to go back to square one, or at least take several steps backwards, and that increases time, costs more money, and so on. So instead, what we did was we said, you know what? We have other approaches to giving you the software that you want, and they're called agile approaches. They're flexible. And by their very nature, the way the work is done in iterative steps, we can actually give you the flexibility, the agility, to change requirements if they need to be changed as we're going along. Because we're going to build this thing little building blocks in little increments. Wow. It was like a light bulb came on, and all of a sudden they were on board with this. This is amazing, and so on and so forth. We introduced a different approach to the work, which avoided the risks of the project being over schedule and over budget by taking a different approach to giving them the end result that they wanted. And the end result was these various programs, the software. So that's just some food for thought for today. Inherent risk, residual risk, and sometimes the only way to deal with one of them or both of them successfully is to consider changing how you're approaching whatever the task is at hand, how you're approaching the work, how you're managing the product, how you're handling your changes or your configurations with your assets. Those are the things that you need to think about so that at the end of the day, what you've done is you've reduced not only the inherent risk that came with it, but you've also found a way to reduce the residual risk. If you have any questions or comments, my contact information is in my LinkedIn profile. And once again, I thank you for watching.